Hello Internet, Seth Skorkowski, and today we're going to take a look at the classic AD&D scenario, The Lost Caverns of Tsojcanth, written by Gary Gygax and published in 1982. It was originally a tournament game released in 1976's WinterCon, but then greatly expanded. It's had a few reprints, but unlike its other S-Series sisters, White Plume Mountain and Tomb of Horrors, that both have updates in the later editions, including 5th edition, it's mostly been left behind in the era of 1st edition D&D. The adventure has a lot to offer. We have a backdrop of rival kingdoms on the brink of war, an overland expedition, some fantastic roleplay potential, and then to top all that off, we have a fantastically large dungeon with a wide array of different treasure and monsters inside of it. The original module had a removable cover with a fold-out map, and then two 32-page booklets, one being the adventure and the other being new monsters and new spells and magic items. While this version is long out of print, you can pick up a PDF copy or a print-on-demand version from DriveThruRPG. DriveThruRPG sent me a copy of both to use in this review. The PDF is good, it's high-res, and I used it for all the images that I'm going to be using throughout this review. And the print-on-demand version is also pretty good, though it's now one book with the maps all printed inside of it. They're easy to read and clear, so huge thank you to DriveThruRPG for sending them to me, and to Wizards of the Coast for keeping these things in print. Wait, I always thought it was called Tsojcanth. What did you call it again? Tsojcanth, or Tsojcanth. One thing that I've learned doing these reviews is if you mispronounce a word, people scream at you in the comments for years. Targaryen, Tsojcanth, Tacocot. Yeah, I am never going to get that name right. Sorry. I first experienced this adventure when I was 15 or 16 years old. It took the better part of a summer for us to play it. And I've run it once as a dungeon master, but mostly what I've done is I have used it as a well of ideas that I've then stolen and used for all of my other different campaigns over the years. If nothing else, this adventure is a fantastic resource for your own campaigns. While the adventure is designed for characters of 6th through 10th level, one thing that I really do like about it is that while character level is certainly very important, what's just as important as character level is player level. Players will need to be masters of their characters and their capabilities, as well as the game itself, if they want to survive this scenario. So what I'm going to do is offer my criticisms and my suggestions as both a dungeon master and a player who has done this scenario. And I'm Jack the NPC. Normally I cover things from a player's side of things, but since Seth's already got that one covered, I'm just here to help. But before we go any further, I must warn you that there will be spoilers. So any players out there, if you want to experience this little piece of D&D history, please stop here. But send your Dungeon Masters this way to see if this is something that they would like to run for you and your group. Okay, Dungeon Masters, let's get this thing going. As I said, Lost Caverns of Tsojcanth has a lot to offer. It is packed with art. Much of this art ended up being recycled and used in the 2nd edition Player's Handbook. I also love the monster roster. While many of these creatures are now recognizable D&D monsters, at the time when the scenario was released, they weren't. A few of them had made some appearances in Dragon magazines prior to this thing's release, but players who are only familiar with the monsters and the spells and the items from the D&D core books were going to be treated to a wide array of completely fresh obstacles. Now, one interesting thing is that not all of the monsters in this booklet appear in the scenario, the Demi-Lich being a big one. So this book of monsters was essentially the rough cut for what would become the Monster Manual 2. Of course, once that and the Unearthed Arcana both came out, much of the freshness of this module was lost because all the cool new stuff that it introduced, people already knew about it now. The adventure begins as the player characters are hired by the nation of Bissell. Long ago, the evil mage Igwilv had set up a lair in the caverns of Tsojcanth where a lot of different artifacts and powerful magical items were held. But now, some of Bissell's enemies are trying to get to them, and the player characters are in a race to recover these items before Bissell's enemies can do it first. While the module suggests that PCs should have to deal with these rivals before they reach the cavern, my suggestion is to make it multiple rival parties, at least 2, possibly 3 different parties. One of these can be weak, while the other could be an elite mirror version of the player characters themselves. For these parties, you can pull it from the 8 pre-generated characters if you want. I mean, they're ready-made for you to use, so might as well use them if the players aren't going to. During the wilderness part, the PCs might face off against one of these rivals or get robbed by them. And then later, once we're inside the caverns themselves, possibly right before the final room, you can have the second party arrive and kind of mess things up and lead to a little bit of excitement. That serves as a good reminder that there are different nations at play here, and what the player characters are doing during this dungeon crawl is really something that's part of something bigger than just themselves. The player characters are given some mounts as well as a map of possible locations for the cavern, and a strange verse that may or may not be helpful. Now real fast, let's talk about handouts. There's several handouts that you can give your players. Now, instead of just reading them aloud, print these out. Maybe even distress them and stain them, but give them to your players as clues, something that they can hold, something that's tactile. This one in particular should be 6, each line being a separate clue that can be discovered within the greater caverns. So maybe print each out on a slender piece of paper and then roll them up into like little scrolls that you then hand to your players throughout the game.
I swear, your only real measurement of how good or bad a module is completely based off of how many handouts you can give out.
It's not my only measure, usually. Now let's talk about the wilderness portion. The module gives us 2 maps, one for DMs and one for players. Again, I recommend spicing up the player's map with some torn edges and maybe tea stain it. One thing that I like about the DM map is that the encounters along the way are noted. It's not randomly rolled when the encounters occur, but once they reach or camp adjacent to one of these dots or numbered locations, that's when an encounter occurs. We get an interesting list of possible encounters. Some of these are pretty large. The Gnoll Band is 32 gnolls, the Goblin Party is 70, the Hobgoblins, which are in the pay of a rival nation, are 81.
Man, I remember those goblins. The wizards were all like, "Hold on guys, we got this." And a couple fireballs later, whatever goblins were still around were running for their lives. Wasn't much of a challenging encounter, but it was a hell of a lot of fun.
The Dwarven Band is a patrol of 107 dwarves. That's a small army right there. And it makes me think of that scene in the movie Willow where the army passes them by. So this isn't some group that the PCs are supposed to fight, but one that they should talk to, and not just as adventurers, but as representatives of the nation of Bissell. Of course, we also have our regular encounters, avalanches, a blue dragon at one point, all fun stuff. Now, one interesting encounter is the Gnome Vale. This is a great role-playing opportunity. If the player characters play this one well, they get to enter this gnomish town, chat with the leader, and they can use this as a great base of operations throughout the rest of the scenario. Once again, they might be doing this not just as adventurers, but as representatives of Bissell, which kind of gives this adventure a fun political edge to it. They're building allies as different nations are preparing for war, so once again, it makes it feel like they're part of something a lot bigger than what they normally are. Now eventually, maybe after a few hours of the wilderness adventure, or maybe after several sessions of the wilderness adventure, the player characters will discover the entrance to the Lost Caverns.
Well, here we are. The Lost Caverns of Tsojcanth, or whatever they're called.
The dungeon consists of 2 levels, the upper lesser caverns and the lower greater caverns. Now if you want prettier color maps, you can find those online. They are pretty damn cool looking. There is a lot down here, and I mean a lot. We have multiple kinds of giants, a Drasilisk, a Behir, a variety of demons, slimes, genies, golems, and much, much more. In fact, my biggest criticism of this module is that there is so many different monsters and encounters in such a small space. In the other S-Series modules that I've reviewed, which are very fun house dungeons, where you've got a wide diversity of obstacles in such a small place like that, in those it makes sense. In White Plume Mountain, the location is a designed puzzle that's set up by an evil wizard like some sinister game of mousetrap. There's even people that are here to feed the monsters and maintain the place. In Tomb of Horrors, it's also a designed location set to thwart intruders, and anything living inside here is in some sort of suspended animation or the like until it gets activated. And in my review of it, I explain my theory of how demons are maintaining it as well. However, in Lost Caverns of Tsojcanth, this is a place that has fallen into disrepair. Sure, there were some set encounters, and a few of them still exist that the player characters might have to deal with, but much of this place has already been looted. Monsters have moved in here and have lived out generations inside this place, and now it's kind of built its own ecosystem that just happens to have a few set obstacles here. There's no maintenance to it, and there's no overseer. So the sheer variety of creatures that are found down here that are all concentrated in such a small place doesn't really make that much sense. The giant that's living in room 14 hasn't wandered over and gotten eaten by the Draculus that's just over in room 16. How does it even get out if it wants to go outside and get some sweet, sweet giant lovin'? It is engaged with some sort of standoff with the shambling mounds that are living over in room 13, but it's not engaged with anything throughout the rest of the dungeon, which is, the whole place is smaller than 4 football fields for each level. You know, it's basically smaller than a good-sized shopping mall, and there is just a lot of different stuff that is just a little bit too close together.
Now, some old gamers are inevitably going to say, well, that's just the new way of looking at dungeons. Back in my day, we didn't give a damn about remotely plausible ecologies or any of that. And we know they're going to say that because they've said that on so many of our other old review videos. But you know what? This is something that's bothered us for 25 years now, so it's not exactly a new way of looking at it.
Now, the Hermit says that the caverns are at a nexus of planes, and that's why there's so many different creatures here. And I can buy that for the large number of creatures that are from other planes, but only so much. Now, this isn't a big gripe about all the stuff that's here, but it's a point that does bother me a little bit. Now, thankfully, the module does help us out by giving us a cheat sheet of all the different monsters that are encountered inside the dungeon and where they are. This thing is super handy, and I wish more modules did something like this. Some of the rooms here are awesome. The Bodak Trophy Room is a personal favorite of mine. It is just so freaking cool, and I have used it in different adventures through over the years. I also like the room with the giant green slime that covers the ceiling and the PCs discovering the mummified elf who died because he was too afraid to step out from cover.
Yeah, it looks like that guy starved to death in there. I wonder what made him so afraid that we wouldn't want to stick his head out and holy crap, we are screwed.
Now a couple little things. Location 13, where the little magic boat is that evidently no one has touched or moved over all the centuries that it's been sitting here, it should be here, not here. Touching on the rival groups again, if you decide to use that idea, and I really suggest that you do, you have several different ways that you can bring a rival party inside the cavern itself. In addition to having them use the main entrance, you can have them come through the river on some sort of raft that they might have made, or through the back of the Draculus lair, the Umber Hulk tunnel, and while it's not mentioned that there's an exit in the Beheer's lair, it should probably have one, so the Beheer can go out and eat goats or something that are along the mountains. Of course, the rival group would need a fight or make a deal with one of those monsters if the player characters haven't killed them already. In the Greater Caverns, there's the Glowing Grotto, which will teleport anyone who enters it to one of 4 different places, including a pretty difficult Minotaur maze. While I do like the grotto and all the different locations that it can send the player characters to, because this can split your party into 4 completely different places where they're either going to have to fight or do some problem solving in order to get back to where they started, this can grind your game to a halt as you've got 4 groups that are now sitting around the table kind of waiting their turn in order to role play it out, what they're going to do depending on wherever they are. And that basically means that anytime you could have up to 3 groups of players that are just sitting there doing nothing, and that's kind of boring. So just to keep the game going and keep all your players engaged, I'd recommend you either send them all to the same location or maybe split them between 2 different locations at most. And speaking of teleports, let's talk about the final room. At the center of the dungeon is a spherical room, and to access it, the player characters are going to have to open all 6 pairs of giant doors. However, upon their initial opening, each entrance will teleport the party to a different part of the dungeon. My suggestion here is that you not tell the player characters where they arrive after they teleport. Don't show them on the map of, you were here and now you're here, unless they have some way in character to figure out where they are now versus where they were before. This might mean that they have to start a completely new map over, just starting from this new location, and then as they're kind of wandering around and exploring the dungeon, eventually finding some sort of room or passage that they had before, and then they can combine their maps and realize that yes, they were still in the same dungeon on the same level. And the aspect of not knowing where they are in relation to where they were can really heighten the mood, so it's a lot more fun for them to think that they might be in a completely different dungeon somewhere else until they explore around and figure out oh no, we ended up here somehow. Eventually they'll open all 6 doors, and on the 7th attempt they'll be able to enter Igwil's treasure room. from. And the most notable thing they're going to see here is Igwil's daughter. And then she'll reveal that she's a vampire fighter with a bad attitude and is one hell of a tough opponent.
Not just that, but because the player characters find what they believe is a sleeping woman atop some sort of dais, some dumbass is going to go running down there and try to kiss her like she's Sleeping Beauty and he's Prince Charming, and they are going to be in for one hell of a nasty surprise. Trust me, I would know.
However, the vampire Drelsna is not the most difficult opponent inside this dungeon. Once the heroes inspect the treasure, they're going to summon one of the most terrifying monsters in AD&D, and it's a personal favorite of mine, the Zeg Yi. These are monsters that never really translated that well into any of the editions after 2nd, and they are just awful. Aside from being immune to just about everything but a few spells, the Zeg Yi's attack is a blast of pure negative force, and any weapons touching it are also subject to this negative energy. In addition to damage, the force instantly destroys all non-magical items. All clothing, armor, weapons, gears, all gone, no save, it's just goodbye. Now, magic items do get a saving throw. It's treated as if it was against lightning, so there is a chance that magic items would be able to save against this and not be destroyed. Once the creature is dead, and its death does a 10-foot explosion of this item-destroying force, if the player characters keep digging through the treasure, they're going to release a Zeg Yi, which is pretty much the same thing but positive energy instead of negative.
Between these two monsters, player characters that manage to survive this encounter are probably going to be completely naked, except for any magic items they had that happen to make their saving throws against them. So statements like, "Our characters left the Lost Caverns completely naked," is a pretty common thing for veterans of this scenario to say.
Hopefully the items that they discover inside the Lost Caverns are going to more than make up for the gear that they lost. There is a lot of great items in here, so your player characters are going to be fine. Don't worry about the gear that they lost. And many of these items include a full set of the books that raise your stats, so that's a pretty cool thing to have. Overall, Lost Caverns of Tsojcanth has a lot to offer. It was a very ambitious adventure when it came out. Most of my criticisms can be easily worked around. However, the biggest problem with it today is that it's really just a product of its time. All the new and previously unseen items and monsters have now been very common in D&D for decades, and the wow factor for them has understandably faded because of that. Some monsters, such as the final two creatures, don't translate that well into the later editions when item saving throws were no longer a thing that players had to deal with. So it would require some aggressive house ruling or modifications to this scenario for it to be updated for any of the current editions, and allow all the monsters to have their very real and terrifying powers that they were intended to have. But at the time it was released, Lost Caverns of Tsojcanth was incredible, and it's what modern scenarios should really strive to be. It gave us politics and a huge scope of the world. It provided a quick reference pages for the dungeon masters to keep the game moving quickly. It gave us a wide assortment of imaginative challenges, but most importantly, it gave us something new. The catalog of new things means that seasoned players, many who might be dungeon masters themselves, wouldn't have seen all of these things before. It's all fresh and exciting, rather than just the same old stuff from the Monster Manual and the Dungeon Master's Guide that everybody really knows what it is. And I think that's the big reason that this adventure hasn't had the update throughout the editions like some of the other old first edition modules have, but even then it still does have a lot to offer us. I've said in videos before that modules are a great resource for idea mines, and dungeon masters that are looking for something very cool and creative ideas that they could throw against their players should really check out modules, and a lot of DMs can really benefit from giving this adventure a look.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to see some more of our videos, such as game reviews and how-tos, just hit that subscribe button. Till next time, gamers, you have a great day. Toe Jam.
Tsojcanth.
Soul Jam.
Tsojcanth.
Chipotle.
You're not even trying.